Hello and welcome to another episode of The Photo Guru. I'm your host, John Armitage. This is the third video in a series on basic photography. I'll be discussing shutter speed and what effects it will have on your images. The shutter is the mechanism that regulates the amount of time your camera is open. Shutter speeds vary greatly from several seconds and minutes to fractions of a second. The shutter functions by opening a curtain inside your camera for the prescribed amount of time. The speed that you choose will not affect only your image exposure, but the motion of your subject. An example of shutter speed start with bulb setting, which allows you to keep your shutter open until you release the trigger. And then in set increments, usually starting with 8 seconds, 4 seconds, 2 seconds, and then on to fractional settings like a half a second, a 30th of a second, or 1/500th of a second. As you can see, just like film speeds from the previous video, shutter speeds double with each increment. And like film speeds, each progressing speed either doubles your light as it slows down or cuts your light in half as it gets faster. The thing you must take into consideration when choosing a shutter speed is the motion of your subject. If you want to stop the motion, like freezing a bird in flight, you will need a fast shutter speed like 1/500th of a second or faster. When using a slower shutter speed, you can get a blurred subject, and sometimes you may want that blurred effect. But most of the time you will want to have a subject that is still and sharp. So why do we have these slower settings like 8 seconds or even the bulb setting? There are occasions you might want to use a slower shutter. And keep in mind, for you to be successful, you will need to use your camera on a tripod or a surface that won't move. I highly recommend a tripod though, and there are many to choose from in varying price ranges. So let's say you're trying to photograph fireworks at the 4th of July festival. Once you have set your camera up and framed your shot in the viewfinder, you will need to pre-focus the camera. Your subject is going to be in a large enough area that will be easy to focus. Just set your lens to the farthest focus point. Now set your shutter to bulb, and when you see the fireworks go up, open your shutter and hold it open until the firework has detonated and fallen. The longer you hold the shutter open, the longer the streaks of fireworks will be in your image. You can hold it open for several bursts if you like. But the one thing to remember about holding your shutter open for long periods of time in a digital camera is the noise factor. Noise is small little white dots that appear in your image, especially in the darker areas. There are cameras that are designed to minimize noise, but they are expensive and usually used by professional photographers. I urge you to experiment with your camera at varying shutter speeds to see how long you can open your shutter before the buildup of noise occurs. The longer your shutter is open, the worse it becomes. Digital imaging software can reduce noise in your image, but it is not going to completely eliminate it. Another situation you might want to use a slower shutter speed for is if you're photographing a moving car at a race or a bicyclist. Your shutter doesn't need to be too slow, maybe an 1/8 or a 30th of a second. But the trick here is to follow your subject with your camera. As you move your camera with the subject, press the shutter release and follow through in one sweeping motion. This will give you a subject that looks still, but the background will be blurred, giving you an image that has the feeling of motion. Your shutter works and stops just like film speed and aperture. The shutter is a factor in your exposure, but motion of your subject is going to dictate what shutter you will ultimately select. Remember that when you change one mechanism, you will need to adjust the other mechanisms to balance the exposure. Soon I will put all three of these controlling mechanisms together to show you how to achieve a good exposure in any situation. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please push the like and subscribe buttons below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.